if you really want to understand orchestral music, I mean, why it sounds the way it does, how it tells a huge story without any words, you have to start with the classical symphony.
You really do.
Yeah.
It was, without a doubt, the most important type of instrumental music of the entire classical period.
And what's so fascinating is where it came from. It wasn't some grand invention. It started as the Italian overture.
That's it.
Yeah.
Basically, the short opening music for an opera, the stuff you'd hear for a few minutes before the real show began, it was almost disposable.
But then composers started thinking, wait a minute.
Exactly. They realized these little pieces were actually pretty good. Good enough to stand on their own without any singers or elaborate stage sets.
Which sounds like just a small musical change, but that had a massive social impact.
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
Because once the music was independent, it didn't have to stay in private palaces for kings and queens.
It moved into public concert halls.
Right. For anyone who could buy a ticket, it was a total game changer. It was art for the public.
And as the music got bigger and more complex, the orchestras had to grow with it. This is the period that really defined the blueprint for the orchestra we still see today. So let's unpack that blueprint.
Sounds good. Let's start with the overall structure. A classical symphony is almost always broken into 4 sections. We call them movements.
And each movement has a totally different mood, right? It's like a journey.
A complete emotional journey. So
Yeah.
movement 1 is the driver. It's always fast, always full of energy. It's meant to grab your attention right away.
And it follows a really specific pattern, which we'll get to later, called sonata form.
Yes, that's its logical core.
Yeah.
But after all that energy, you need a break. That's movement 2.
The contrast.
The total contrast. It's slow, it's lyrical, often very serious and beautiful. It's where the deep emotional weight of the piece usually is.
Okay, so we've had fast and then slow. What's movement 3?
This is where you can really see the history.
Yeah.
Originally, it was a dance, a very graceful, courtly dance called a minuet and trio.
Think powdered wigs and elegant, structured dancing. Exactly. Polite. But as time went on, composers got a little restless. They wanted something more exciting.
So they swapped it out,
They did. They replaced the minuet with something called a scherzo.
which means joke in Italian.
It does. So it's faster, it's playful, sometimes it's like a little musical prank. It shows how tastes were changing from something formal to something more, witty and fun.
And that leaves the big finish, movement 4.
The finale. It just brings all the energy back, and then some. It's often the fastest and most brilliant part of the whole symphony, designed to end with a huge triumphant feeling.
Okay, so that's the 4-part plan. But who is actually making all this sound? Let's get into the orchestra itself.
Right. At the very heart of it, the absolute core is the string section.
The violins, violas, cellos, and the big double basses, they sit right at the front for a reason.
Because they are the engine. They play most of the main melodies, most of the music, really. They create that rich, warm sound that fills the hall.
And the violins are split into 2 groups, right? Firsts and seconds, almost always. And that's key, because having them play 2 different parts at the same time immediately creates a much thicker, more complex texture.
So if the strings are the foundation, what are the woodwinds?
The woodwinds are the color. They're the spice. You've got pairs of flutes, oboes, clarinets, and bassoons sitting just behind the strings.
And they each have their own personality.
Completely unique personalities. The oboe have that bright, piercing sound that can cut through everything else. It's like a spotlight.
And the clarinet was pretty new back then, wasn't it?
It was. And it brought this incredibly smooth, mellow tone that composers like Mozart just fell in love with. They'd use the woodwinds to have these little musical conversations with the strings.
Okay, foundation and color. Now we need power.
And that's the brass and percussion. We're mainly talking about 2 French horns and 2 trumpets. But here's where it gets really interesting technically.
How so?
These instruments didn't have any valves yet.
Wait, no valves. So, they couldn't play all the notes.
Exactly. They were really limited. They were basically just long coiled tubes,
Yeah.
so they could only play a few notes in whatever key the piece was in.
So how did they sound so heroic and powerful?
Composers used them very strategically. They didn't play the complicated melodies. They were there for impact, to come in on the loud parts and add this massive, royal, powerful sound. They're like pillars holding up the roof.
And for percussion, it was all about the timpani, the kettle drums.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And they're not just for banging on. They're tuned. They're tuned to specific notes that fit the key of the music, and they're used to hammer home the rhythm and signal these huge climactic moments.
So we have the instruments, we have the 4-movement plan. Let's go back to that term you mentioned for movement 1, sonata form. This is the logic behind the music.
It really is. It's the musical architecture. And you can think of it like a story in 3 acts. Act 1. Act 1 is the exposition. This is where the composer introduces the main characters, the musical themes. You'll hear the first main idea and then a second contrasting idea in a different key. The goal is just to present the material clearly.
Okay, so we've met the characters. Then comes Act 2.
The development. And if the exposition was the introduction, the development is the conflict, the action sequence.
This is where things get messy.
Exactly. Yeah. The composer takes those nice, clear themes and starts tearing them apart, stretching them, chopping them up, smashing them together in new ways. The music feels really unstable, moving through all these different keys. It creates a ton of tension.
And all that tension has to be resolved. Which brings us to Act 3.
The recapitulation. It's a fancy word for recap. You hear those original themes from the beginning again, but this time they're all in the stable home key.
So it's like coming home after a long, crazy journey. It feels satisfying.
That's the whole point. It resolves all the conflict from the development. And sometimes, just to really nail the ending, they'll add a short, super energetic finish called a coda.
It's such a logical structure. But logic alone can be, well, boring. There has to be something else going on.
There is, and it's the most important element of all, contrast. Constant, sudden contrast is what makes this music so exciting.
You mean like loud and soft?
Yes, but really sudden. You'll hear the entire orchestra playing at full volume forte, and then in a split second, it drops to a whisper piano. That shock is incredibly dramatic.
And it wasn't just volume.
Not at all. High notes against low notes, simple rhythms that suddenly become complex and jumpy. But the biggest one was the contrast between major and minor keys.
Major being the happy, bright-sounding keys.
Right. And minor keys sounding more sad, dark, or intense. Composers would switch between them to tell an emotional story, taking you from sunlight to shadow and back again in moments.
So let's talk about the architects, the people who actually built all this. There are 3 absolute titans, starting with Franz Joseph Haydn.
Papa Haydn. He's often called the father of the symphony for a reason. He wrote over 100 of them. He's the one who really standardized that 4-movement structure.
And he had the perfect setup to experiment, didn't he?
The perfect setup. He worked for a wealthy family, the Esterházys, and they gave him his own private orchestra.
A private lab.
Literally. He could write something in the morning and have his orchestra play it for him in the afternoon. It let him try out all sorts of new, weird ideas. He was also famous for his wit, for putting musical jokes in his symphonies to surprise the audience.
Then comes Mozart, the genius.
Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He wrote 41 symphonies, and his are just known for this perfect sense of balance and for melodies that are so beautiful they feel like they should be sung.
He brought his opera background into the orchestra.
He really did. He brought that drama. And he was an absolute master of using the woodwinds, creating these delicate, colorful conversations between the instruments that no one had really done before.
And finally, the revolutionary. The man who bridges the gap to the next era, Ludwig van Beethoven.
Beethoven starts off writing in the classical style, very much like Haydn and Mozart. But then everything changes with his 3rd symphony, the Eroica.
The Heroic Symphony.
And it was. It was so much longer, louder, and more emotionally powerful than anything anyone had ever heard. It completely changed the definition of what a symphony could be.
His music wasn't just elegant anymore. It was about struggle, personal struggle.
Exactly. He took that development section we talked about, the conflict section, and he made it massive, truly epic. So when the resolution finally came, it felt like a hard-won victory.
And he physically expanded the orchestra?
He did. He added instruments like trombones and the piccolo for more power and color. And in his final symphony, the 9th, he did something nobody had ever done.
He added a choir.
A huge choir and vocal soloists. He brought the human voice right into the symphony, basically saying that instrumental music alone wasn't enough to express what he wanted to say. He completely broke the old rules and opened the door to the next era of music, the Romantic period.
When you look back, the legacy is just immense. The work these 3 composers did basically set the standard for all orchestral music that came after.
It's true. When you go to see a movie today, the orchestra playing that film score is set up and balanced based on the principles perfected back in the classical period.
So many of the instruments, the very idea of structure and balance, it all comes from this era.
And the logic of it, that journey of fast, slow dance and a huge finish, you can still feel that structure in all kinds of modern music.
I think what this music ultimately shows is that rules and structure don't have to limit creativity. In fact, they can provide the perfect framework for telling the most incredible emotional stories with nothing but sound.
It's the perfect meeting of logic and emotion.
Good luck with your studies.